I'm incredibly delighted to be able to welcome all of you to this series on cultural analytics, generously supported through the iSchool and also through the Berkeley Institute of Data Science. Really eager to create these crossroads where people are coming from all different parts of campus to engage in trying to understand the complexity of cultural phenomena, to leverage computational and data science methods for finding those patterns that are both common and distinct to different cultural areas, cultural groups, cultural phenomena. So I think we have an enormous opportunity here. South Hall is wonderfully situated at the crossroads of all parts of campus, and conceptually, of course, Berkeley Institute for Data Science is also at this kind of crossroads. So I'm delighted to be able to participate in this capacity. I'm even more delighted to be able to introduce Manvir Singh as our first speaker in this series, which hopefully will go for the next 4 or 5 years. So it's an absolutely inaugural lecture in the series. Manvir is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at Davis. I first met Manvir actually right around, was it before or after during the epidemic?
It must have been somewhere like either right before it started or right after.
Right. Okay. We met online, and he had reached out to think about folklore and folktale in particular on a very, very large scale, which of course is something that I've been doing in my career. And we started to have some very fruitful conversations, and he brought it further into an incredible project that he is leading called Anansi, which is looking at folktale across many, many different cultural areas. He's worked a great deal on shamanism. He's worked on witchcraft. He's worked on song, which he'll be telling us about today. Questions of both cultural specificity and universality, things that unite us as humans, but also things that help us define the groups in which we are, in which we live. You might also know him from his incredible series of columns in the New Yorker. And so I'm just delighted that Manvir is able to be part of this and came down from Davis to work with us today over the weekend in thinking through what is cultural analytics and what kinds of phenomena can we productively explore. I don't want to take too much time. Manvir's got much more interesting things to say than I do, so I hope you'll join me in welcoming Manvir here too.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Tim, for that introduction. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to speak to this group. It's an honor to be the inaugural lecture. So I'm an anthropologist, and a major driving interest of mine is this interplay between universality and diversity. My research is inspired by the fact that humans exhibit many behaviors that on the one hand are clearly influenced by cultural transmission, yet on the other hand are fundamental to our social lives and experience and appear in societies everywhere or nearly everywhere. These include domains like magic and religion, aesthetic behaviors like music, like story. They include institutions that regulate relationships like justice and marriage. These widespread cultural domains are at the center of my research program. Among other research goals, one of my aims in studying them is to answer this question. So how do widespread cultural behaviors compare across societies? Another way of asking that question is something like, what are patterns of universality and diversity? So now, any attempt to characterize patterns of universality and diversity confronts a basic challenge, which is we need to establish a sample that on the one hand allows us to generalize to humanity and test universality. So this ideally means, in like an ideal situation, measuring all of societies and somehow accounting for non-independence among them. Societies might have similar traits because of cultural diffusion, because of shared common ancestry, That's of course impossible. So the question we confront is, given limited approximations or given limited resources, what is the first approximation? So a type of data that anthropologists often turn to, or a type of sampling strategy, is using stratified samples. These are built generally through a common methodology. So first one would somehow divide the world's societies. We can also debate over what constitutes a society, but just putting that aside, we can divide societies into subsamples to cover a wide range of cultural diversity while minimizing these sources of non-independence. And then we can have some method of choosing from subsamples. Maybe you want to prioritize well-documented societies. Maybe you want to have random selection. There are quite a few of these, but the two most common are probably the standard cross-cultural sample, which comprises 186 societies. They're meant to represent human cultural and geographic diversity. And then there's also something called the probability sample file. And I'm going to be talking about this later. This is 60 incredibly well-documented societies that cover human diversity. They are places where anthropologists have worked for a long time, where they've been fluent in the language. They've produced rich, large bodies of description. So like I said, I've investigated or am investigating cultural patterns in many cultural domains, but for the function of this talk, I'm going to focus on these two, on music and on story. Okay, I'm going to start with music then. So the project that I'm going to mostly talk about right now is called The Natural History of Song. I established this in 2014 with Sam Mayer here and Luke Lowacki. We were all graduate students at the time. And the project seeks to understand this question: what is universal about music and what varies? The Natural History of Song is composed of two parts. One is called NHS ethnography, and the other is called NHS discography. So I'll start by talking about NHS ethnography. Does anyone know who this is, who the person is, and who all three people are? Yeah, this is Malinowski, Bronislaw Malinowski, working with Trobriand Islanders. And so I include this picture because it's one of his ethnographies, or all of his ethnographies that mention music are actually part of this project. So the goal here is to characterize the social and behavioral context of song across cultures. We build this using the ethnographic texts in ePhraf. Is anyone here familiar with ePhraf? This is an amazing resource. It's based at Yale. It's a massive repository of ethnographic texts. It covers something like 300 something societies, thousands or tens of thousands of, or maybe thousands of documents. And each document, each paragraph is hand-coded for topics. So this paragraph is about sorcery, witchcraft, infant care, etc. So we focused on the probability sample file. Recall that this is a stratified, this is a pseudo-random sample meant to characterize human geographic diversity, very richly documented. We got in total 5,000 descriptions of songs across the probability sample file. So these are paragraphs the anthropologists are describing, on this day, with the Andaman Islanders, for example, someone started drumming and they danced and this happened. And then each description of song was hand-coded for 60 variables. This is a map just showing you the 60 societies of the probability sample file. Yeah, you probably cannot read the names, but it's just to give you a sense of what's included. Okay, so we've published a number of analyses with NHS ethnography. I'm going to focus on one right now. The driving question here was which behaviors are reliably associated with song. So, for example, people have argued that humans across societies consistently use songs for ends like dancing, for ends like soothing infants, healing, communicating love, or signaling mate quality. So we wanted to test these empirically. And we tested 20 hypothesized associations. So actually beforehand, we had surveyed something like 1,000 researchers studying music and culture, asking what they thought were associations. We also went through the literature. We found 20 associations that we thought were worth testing, that had come up sufficiently often and or were in the literature. And really critically, an analysis like this needs methods to address ethnographer bias. And I'll tell you a little more about that. So we can take an example. Let's say we're interested in this question. Is music associated with infant care? Across societies, do people, is infant care a context in which music occurs? So of course, we cannot simply just test whether ethnographers talk about infant care in their passages about music. There are many reasons that ethnographers might have for selective reporting. Maybe they're not interested in infant care. Maybe they cannot actually go to a place and watch infant care because of social norms. Maybe they have a bias against it, whatever. And so what we ultimately had decided to do was to compare each of these behaviors, the frequency of it in the texts that make up the natural history of song with all the other texts written by that ethnographer. So for example, if we're thinking about Malinowski, then you would look up, okay, in all of our texts that Malinowski has written about music, do you find infant care? And then we compare that against how much he has just written about infant care more generally. That kind of constitutes the null. So you're testing whether he's writing about it substantially more often in texts about music than just in his background texts. And these analyses were led by Dean Knox and Chris Lucas. So we determined the presence of each of these 20 behaviors in the text via two methods. The first are these hand-coded annotations that ehraf provides. So remember, an amazing thing about this repository of ethnographic text is that people have gone through and they've tagged each paragraph for one or more of 750 identifiers. Oh, this text is about infant care, sorcery, warfare, et cetera, et cetera. Then we also used keywords using WordNet. So we provided key terms that were relevant to our hypothesis. So for instance, for infant care, these are the terms that we used: infant, baby, cradle, lullaby. It provides a broader set of terms that are semantically related. And then we filtered anything that seemed peculiar. These are the results. I don't expect you to go through all of them, but if you're interested, here is the hand-coded analyses, and here is the, I guess I can do it with my mouse. Here's the hand-coded, here is the WordNet. And what we find is that for 14 out of the 20 behaviors, we find evidence using both methods. So dance, infancy, healing, religious activity, etc. In fact, all of the 20 behaviors had some association in one of the methods, but 14 had association using both methods. So I just wanted to provide that to give you a sense of some of the analyses we've been doing. I'm going to spend more time on NHS discography. So where the ethnographic corpus sought to document the behavioral context of music, the discography is centered more on mapping out the acoustical structure of music as it compares it across societies. So in our first version, we've since expanded it, and I'll talk a bit about that. But in the first version, we started with the 30 cultural regions in the probability sample file. So the probability sample file, if you remember, is these 60 societies. And the way they had built that is they split the world into 60 cultural regions: Pacific Northwest, Southern South America, Melanesia, Southeast Asia, Polynesia. And so we started with those 30 cultural regions. And from every region, we got a field recording of a dance song, a healing song, a love song, and a lullaby. A lot of these we got at the archive of we used two archives in particular, one in Indiana, one at Harvard. I'm forgetting their names in this moment, but that's where we got a lot of these recordings. In some instances, we had to reach out to ethnomusicologists to get field recordings. Ultimately, we got 118 songs. We've since expanded this. Now we have 1,007 field recordings. And then we've annotated these using diverse methods. So we've had naive ratings where we play them for people on the internet and ask them, how fast do you think this is? How melodically complex, how rhythmically complex, etc. We've had expert ratings where expert musicians listen to them and answer more kind of sophisticated questions about acoustical structure. We've used Western staff notation, and then we've used music information retrieval software. And the idea is that each of these methods has its limitations. So Western staff notation, of course, is imposing a particular model or schema onto how the music works. But the hope is that by using these diverse annotation approaches, you can compensate for these limitations. And I'm going to show you actually for some of our analyses, it doesn't even matter which one you use. Okay, so this is version 1 of the NHS discography, just to give you a sense of where the field recordings had come from. So one of the topics that we've investigated the most using NHS discography, and this is partly because the structure of it is very amenable to this kind of question, is examining form-function associations. And so the idea here is that, is there some reliable association between the form of a song, of some music, and its social function? So for instance, do dance songs around the world share features that, do they share some common features? Do lullabies share some common features that distinguish them from other domains? Do, for example, healing songs or love songs? Do songs that share behavioral functions exhibit common musical features? Now this, if this is the case, we should expect 2 predictions. First, naive listeners should identify the function of songs from their form alone. If I play these songs for all of you, you should be able to reliably, above chance, identify the function of that song. And songs that share functions should have similar forms across societies. We've investigated this in a couple ways. I'll tell you about one experiment that we ran. So we used a sample of 750 M-Turkers in 60 countries, and we had them listen to random 14-second excerpts of each song. And we actually ourselves, they were random, but we just made sure that there aren't clear contextual cues in there, like a baby crying. And then we had them rate on a 6-point scale how much they think it's used for dancing, for soothing a baby, to heal illness, to express love, and then 2 other categories, just to make sure they don't have the sense that, okay, all of the songs are in these 4 categories. We had 336 listens per subject, or about 25,000 listens in total, 225 per song. So before you look at the results, I'll just explain what exactly these plots are showing. So the y-axis is the average rating for a given song domain, and the x is the domain. So you can see over here, on the dimension to soothe the baby, lullabies are rated very strongly, very highly. Love songs much less so, healing songs even less, and dance songs least of all. Okay, so what this shows is that people very often say that lullabies sound like they're definitely used, on average, I guess like a 3.5 to soothe the baby. Here's dancing, so people are really good at identifying dance songs. Here's healing illness, so they can identify healing songs above chance. The effect is not as strong as with dance songs or lullabies, but considerable nevertheless. Here are the results for the dimension express love to another person. So in this study, we found no effect. So on average, people could not identify love songs above chance. They did actually say that they seem to, the dimension on which love songs came higher was used to tell a story. So they could tell that semantic or lyrical content was important or was doing something, but they could not tell that they were used to express love. So we next asked how universal this effect was, and we addressed this specifically by asking, do listeners around the world share conceptions of what songs should sound like? So for instance, do people in the US and India have a similar notion of what a dance song is? To answer this question, we designed the experiment so that we actually had 3 subsamples, 250 people in the US, 250 people in India, and 250 people in the rest of the world. This was just how MTurk worked when we were running this study. So each of these samples had 250 people. Again, you're going to see a couple plots like this. 3-dimensional plots are a bit tricky to present, but what they're just showing is that how you're saying each song in the discography plotted along how it was rated in India, in the world, in the US. Maybe the most indicative thing is just looking at the R squared. So here we have an R squared of 0.97. So if people in India rated a song as very high on to soothe the baby. So did people in our US sample and in our world sample. We have a very similar strong convergence for ratings on dancing. So again, R-squared of 0.97. Again, convergence on the dimension to heal illness. There's admittedly more variation here, but given that healing songs were perhaps the most foreign to our participants, it's striking that we nevertheless, they share a mental model of what they should sound like. Okay, so we found support for this first prediction. What about the second? Do songs that share social functions have similar forms? So we had to address this. We ran a second experiment, this time with 1,000 listeners in the US and India. We used the same excerpts. We had them rate song form this time instead of function. This is actually how we got those naive listener ratings. So they rated things like this: how melodically complex, rhythmically complex, what's the, how fast is it, steadiness of the beat, how arousing is it, and then contextual features. I'm not going to go through all the results here, but here is just some of the findings for musical features. And the thing that is, I think, most striking is that what we really consistently found was that dance songs and lullabies represented the opposite points on each of these dimensions. So you can see dance songs are the most melodically complex, lullabies the least. Dance songs are the most rhythmically complex, lullabies the least, etc. And in fact, if you run a PCA on all the musical features, you find that dance songs here in blue are separated from lullabies here in green. So dance songs are arousing, they're fast, they're melodically complex, they're rhythmically dominated. Lullabies are, as expected, slower, less arousing, less rhythmically dominated. So on the basis then we found evidence that songs that share social functions have similar forms. Although we found this mostly in this study when contrasting dance songs and lullabies. Now, a limitation, of course, over here is that we conducted this experiment with internet users who are competent in English. So there is the generalizability of our findings are therefore quite limited. For that reason, we've now run versions of this experiment with speakers of 28 languages across 49 countries, speakers of, for example, Amharic, Korean, Urdu. We've also run versions of this study in 3 smaller scale societies. So since I've done long-term fieldwork with Mentawai communities in Indonesia, I ran this experiment over there. My colleague ran it in Nangitam, and then I and a colleague went and conducted a similar, the same study on Vanuatu. And our findings replicate in these other populations. So here's just for dancing, you can see here are the Turk findings. So dancing is, people say that dance songs are for dancing. Here are 49 countries, 28 languages. People say that dance songs are for dancing. And here's our smaller scale societies. People say that dance songs are for dancing. And again, we found the same effect for healing songs and lullabies, although not, I think, for love songs. We also have trained a predictive model on the songs in 29 regions, and then asked it to predict the behavioral context of the songs in the 30th region. And here's what you see as performance. So 25% would just be random. And you can see that using the representations in these different annotation styles, so the model performs pretty decently at identifying the behavioral function. And if you combine annotation forms, in this case, expert in transcription, expert ratings and staff notation, then you get a little bit higher performance. And also in related analyses, we have computationally identified features that characterize these different song domains. So like I said, we've since expanded the NHS discography so that now it contains 1,007 songs in many more behavioral domains, many more societies. And this is just showing, again, we trained a model to predict the function of songs, and you can see the model is really good at lullabies and dance songs. I forget what chance is. Oh yeah, okay, maybe this is significance. So I guess work songs, yeah, so morning songs it's not good at. Love songs, again, it's all of our features are showing that love songs do not seem to be characterized by similar acoustic features, but I really want to emphasize over here, this very strong effect for lullabies and dance songs. Okay. Until when am I speaking?
Probably like 1:15.
1:15. Cool. Okay. So the natural history of song has had many, many lessons, but one in particular has been evidence of the universality of dance songs and lullabies. These seem to appear ubiquitously across societies, and I've presented all of this evidence that they are the most acoustically stereotyped of the song domains that we have examined. And this has in turn informed some recent evolutionary theorizing as music. There have been a couple of major theories in recent years that have been put forward for the evolution of music. Some argue that it's about social bonding, some argue that it's about a form of signaling. There are these two in particular. They were published together in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. But both of them focused in part on the adaptive benefits of moving in synchrony and singing to infants. Both of them took the fact that these song domains seem to be universal and seem to be very stereotyped as something fundamental about why we have music and how music works. Okay, so I want to say that because at this point in our research, we confronted a twist. And we got an email from this man. This man is Kim Hill. He's an anthropologist at Arizona State University. He's conducted more fieldwork than any other anthropologist I know. I think 16 years in total of fieldwork. So, he's done fieldwork for something like 50 years, but 16 years just actually working with communities. And so last year he emailed the three of us, Sam Mayer, Luke Lowacki, and myself. And then he and I corresponded for quite a while. And in May, we published a paper on some of his really interesting observations. And so here's what he told us. So among the several groups that Kim has worked with are the Northern Ache of Paraguay. The Northern Ache were full-time hunter-gatherers until the 1970s. Kim has conducted over 122 months of fieldwork. That's over 10 years in total with them. He's fluent in the Ache language. He has collected a lot of Ache music and has been very interested in it. He's translated lyrics. And in the entirety of his fieldwork, he has never observed dancing or infant-directed song. And he has the observation hours to show for it. This includes thousands of hours of behavioral observation, which has included, like I said, recording much Ache music. And Kim actually first came to the Ache working for the Peace Corps. So he came with them soon after they were settled on one of these reservations in Paraguay, and has lived in incredibly close proximity. He's done focal observation where he follows women from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. and then he slept in their camps. But after we published a lot of this, there's been a lot of like, well, did he get enough access? Did he see them? And I really don't know an anthropologist who has done harder and more intensive work, which is why I found his observations so striking. So what we conclude in the paper is that the Northern Ache, probably lost dancing and infant-directed song as a part of a larger cultural collapse, as a part of a larger cultural decline. So here we're contrasting the Northern Ache with the Southern Ache. And you can see that both the Northern Ache and the Southern Ache are missing infant-directed song, also shamanism, horticulture, canoe making. And there have been cultural phylogenetic studies that show that the ancestors of the Southern and Northern Ache seem to have all of these behaviors. The Ache are Tupian speakers, and people have determined that Proto-Tupian, early Tupian speakers had all of these things: shamanism, horticulture, canoe making, a system of clans. But that the ancestor of the Ache seem to have lost them because of really catastrophic population decline. Then maybe sometime in the 19th century, the Northern Ache split off from the Southern Ache, a small group, I think maybe a family, split off. And along the way, they seem to have lost more. They lost dancing, they lost the knowledge to make fire, they lost group music making and stringed instruments. And what this single case study seems to suggest is that cultural transmission seems required for the maintenance of dance and infant-directed song. This is what we read in the paper. Our observations suggest that dance and lullabies are more like fire making than smiling. Individuals do not spontaneously engage in them, but must invent, tweak, and culturally transmit them. So just to summarize this section on music and given that this is a talk series, a series about cultural analytics, just some lessons we've taken from our project. So on the one hand, I think I've really seen how systematic cross-cultural projects with representative to some extent samples can indicate cross-cultural regularities, such as common features of dance songs and lullabies, or behaviors that are reliably associated with music. On the other hand, what all of this research has also shown is that single, really intensely studied cases can overturn claims of universality. And despite lots of kind of big comparative broad work, single case studies can have really important theoretical implications. And one lesson that I've kind of taken from this, just from the Ajay case study, is that true tests of universality, of saying that this is an absolutely universal behavior, are very difficult, if not impossible. Okay, so that is some of the work on music. Now I will tell you about story. The story work is much more in progress. So the music work is, a somewhat clean story. We've done all this stuff. This isn't really in progress, and so I'm sharing it also because I would love to get feedback and thoughts on what we can do. Okay, so the project here is Anansi. Tim had gestured at it. This is named for the trickster that took literature from the sky god and delivered it to humanity. As with the natural history of song, a goal of Anansi is to answer this question: what is universal about story and what varies? For people who are familiar, this is this question, this way of asking questions has kind of had a bit of a complicated history in narratology and folklore. But it's one that I think has had a very timeless allure and appeal, and it's one that has ensnared me. Another interest that we have with this that I did not write here is the thought that maybe stories are an alternative lens into culture, norms, psychology. There are real attempts to understand the ways in which diverse people have thought about the world, and one thought is that maybe story is a way to address that. So this is a project I co-direct with TC Zhang. We started it both during our PhDs, but our team includes many people, including Tim, but also evolutionary social scientists. Some of you all might know Pramit Chaudhary and Joseph Dexter. They do digital humanities work. We have psychologists. And then we've also had many RAs. So I can go more into how we chose the stories afterwards. I didn't include that here. But in its current form, Anansi consists of more than 1,500 stories covering 38 world regions and 76 diverse cultures. So the sampling strategy is 20 stories from each of 38 world regions, or 20 stories from each of 2 cultures in each of 38 world regions. So 1,520 stories in all. For each story, we are coding a big suite of variables. First are 21 story level variables, such as how funny the story is, whether it has a happy ending. Given that some of these are quite impressionistic, our aim is to get as many codings per story as possible. So we have kind of a small team of RAs who's constantly reading stories. And I think we're maybe on round 4 or 5 of this. A long-term goal is to maybe put it up online. Yeah, we're still figuring out. We also have character level coding. We have about 10,000 characters. I said greater than 10,000. It might be like around 10,000 in Anansi. And so we have intensive character level coding. We have the character level variables are their traits, their narrative arcs, their relationships among them. And the goal is to actually use the character level variables to kind of reconstruct plot and social networks. Sorry, again, I know this is like a kind of slide faux pas, but these are just an example of some of our character level questions if you want to get an intuition for the kinds of information that we are collecting. Here are the 78 cultures of Anansi. They're colored here by a language family. So here's Indo-European, here's Austronesian, here's Indo-Aztecan. Yeah. So these are incredibly labor-intensive things. This has been maybe the greatest bottleneck in terms of our making progress on this. Just having RAs read about 10,000 characters and answer 64 questions about each of them is taking a very long time. And so I'll tell you about one thing that we've been trying to do. We're trying to use large language models to speed this up. And I'll just tell you about very quickly some of our attempts to do this with the story level variables. So we've had two interns who have been experimenting with using LLMs to annotate Anansi. What I'm going to show over here was stuff that Jordan King has been working on. So over here you see the interclass correlation. This is just one measure of inter-rater reliability for very many story level variables between one of our rounds of story level coding. And over here, this model in particular, this is just some notes about a DeepSeek R1, temperature 0.3. You can see that there's a higher interclass correlation for things like, to what extent is this story an origin myth? How happy is this story? To what extent is this a love song? This is, I mean, some of this is, by psychological standards, I think once you, oh yeah, I mean, I think 0.5 is actually decent, but I think once you get to maybe once you get to 0.5, and especially once you get down here, I think psychologists don't like that. You see that it's really bad at questions. The punish one, I'm not sure, but we consistently find that it really struggles with a question like this. How predictable is this story? The interclass correlation kind of distracts from some of our other issues. So Jordan has been experimenting with all kinds of LLMs. And so here on the right is always a distribution of how humans have answered these questions. So for each of these questions, it's a 1 to 6 scale. So you can see humans are very comfortable using zeros. They say oh, the story is not at all a hero story or a love story or an origin myth. We found that LLMs seem to be more apprehensive about using the zero. Humans seem to prefer the middle. LLMs seem to distribute more. This one over here, ChatGPT at least, is apprehensive about using the 6. Yeah, I'll say that while I was preparing this talk, I was like, this actually doesn't look so bad. But I think our consistent issue has been that they are not performing at a level where we feel comfortable relying on them to provide at least human-like codings. Yeah, so they've all been translated into English, which is one of the limitations I'll talk about. So for some of them we have original language versions in our catalog. And then we also have metadata saying whether there was an original language version in the book from which we got them. But sometimes it's Masai or Arumara or something, and it's yeah, but that's something we're struggling with. Something that people also I can also describe some of what we've been trying with different NLP tools. We actually tried book NLP, but it at least when I tried and then Joseph tried, it didn't do a very good job because obviously it's not designed for this kind of material in this kind of corpus. So here's some of what we've been playing around with. Again, so this is very much in progress. And so I'm also excited for people think. We've done things like sentiment analysis, pronoun ratios, content analysis. We've done both intra-Anansi and between corpora analyses. A goal here is to combine all of these really intensively manually coded variables with NLP tools. For now, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the stuff we've been doing with content analysis. So this is a sub-project, and it involves several Anansi team members. It's being led by Pramit Chaudhary and Joseph Dexter. The analytical tool here is called WordSee. And the idea is that it allows researchers to compare 2 corpora and identify which topics are enriched in one corpus compared to the other. So this is something that Pramit and Joseph have done a lot of work developing. It's an adaptation of a tool used in bioinformatics called GC, gene set enrichment analysis, which is used to look at differential gene expression. So we had an intern that they were working with, Jean Vollet, and the idea is to identify topics enriched in within Anansi and between corpora comparisons. So right now, I'll just focus on some of the comparisons that Jeanne was doing with modern short stories. So she was comparing to a corpus of 145 short stories by Anglophone writers published between 1915 and 1921. This is just off Gutenberg. You can see that Anansi language in modern short stories is much more positive. The language in Anansi is much more negative. I'm going to start by looking at some of the topics that are enriched in Anansi. So the word list that I believe is most enriched in Anansi is words about animals. So here are the words I believe that are most enriched in the animal word list in Anansi compared to short stories: fly, flyfish, bird, fox, bird. So other topics enriched in Anansi, like I said, animals, kin. Anansi, the text in Anansi talk more about males. Enriched in modern short stories are evaluative objects: fancy, fantastic, simple, awkward, positive affect, and that kind of echoes the sentiment analysis. Theory of mind, so word lists about things like understanding, about knowledge, about emotion, just interiority is represented much more in Anansi, or sorry, in modern short story. Abstraction appears much more in modern short stories. Jeanne has also done some preliminary intra-Anansi comparisons. So in this case, comparing European and non-European stories. So she had found no topics enriched in the non-European strikingly. Again, this is all preliminary, but just to give you a sense of some of the stuff we've been trying. In the European set, meanwhile, and realize these are mostly orally narrated European folklores, we find strikingly many of these same topics that are enriched in modern short stories: evaluative adjectives, positive affect, theory of mind, abstraction, also things like economics and money, honor and respect, morality. Yeah. So just some of the challenges, like I said, the manual coding is very labor intensive. We are at about 60%, and the LLMs still perform poorly. This relates to David's question. All of the texts are translated into English, but to what extent are patterns or findings reflecting translation? And we have someone on the team, Damian Blasi, who is like I don't know what his disciplinary affiliation is, something like computational linguist, who is trying to help us see if we can actually figure this out. Just when I myself have tried to build like analytical pipelines, one thing that I'm running into is just it's a very sparse data set because lots of these characteristics are unspecified. We have data like, is this variable unspecified or is this variable not applicable? And of course, you have like 3 characters in a folktale that is 5 paragraphs, and you have 64 variables for each. You're going to have a lot of sparsity. One other thing, Tim and I were talking about this. Of course, we have like typically US undergrads who are reading these stories. They don't have context and reflects kind of more generally the limitations of trying to study text, especially from other societies. But just stepping back, I want to come back to Franz Boas, or I want to come to Franz Boas, who is sometimes considered, a pioneer of American anthropology. So in 1896, Boas published a paper in Science that started like this. He said, modern anthropology has discovered the fact that human society has grown and developed everywhere in such a manner that its forms, its opinions, and its actions have many fundamental traits in common. Later in the paper, he writes, many attempts have been made to discover the causes which have led to the formation of ideas that develop with iron necessity wherever man lives. This is the most difficult problem of anthropology. So this problem of understanding these ubiquitous cultural patterns. Now, in this paper, Boas writes that despite this being this very important question, this central question, we should put it off. We don't know enough about cultural diversity. We don't know enough about the particular practices of the people we're studying. We don't know enough about history, about psychology. I at least think that we can start to do one part of this in a more rigorous way. I think that, of course, there are still limitations with kind of ambitious cross-cultural patterns or like a large-scale cross-cultural studies. But I think we're at least at a place where new analytical tools and the accessibility of these resources that allow us to build cross-cultural corpora give us the opportunity to study cultural regularities far more rigorously, at least, than they have been done at points in history. And I think I get excited about this because it creates opportunities to develop and test these theories for these important ubiquitous human behaviors, including really cool ones like song and story. Okay, so that is my presentation. There are many people involved in the research. These are just some of the main people I had mentioned during the talk who contributed to some of these major analyses. We've had lots of research assistants on Anansi alone. We've had more than 100, so I just want to shout out all of the awesome work that they've been doing. Here are some of the institutions and sources of funding that have supported this work. Here's how you can find me online. At least the published stuff is all on Open Science Framework. Thank you, everyone here, for listening. And I'd gladly take any questions if there are any. One last thing, I just had a book come out a couple months ago. Everyone should buy like 12 copies, give to everyone you know. It's also about cultural patterns, but in a domain that's very different from what I talked about today, shamanism and its interesting echoes across human societies.
While moderating the Q&A session, we're going to try and take some questions here from the floor, and then we have some online, and I'll read those as well. But please, the floor is wide open. Don't hold that.
We had discussed actually in the second iteration having, so always what we're using is the collector's notes. So the idea is not that you make any judgments on the basis of what you're listening to, but on the ethnographic context that is described in the notes by the field recorder. As you're gesturing, there are instances where a song is for dancing and also for healing. What we have done is prioritize primary functions. We have discussed actually having for each of them a list of their different functions, not having these as mutually exclusive categories. Honestly, at this moment, I'm forgetting why we did not do that in the extension, because this was a big limitation in the first round. But yeah, so just to say, ultimately, we often go on the basis of what the ethnographer is writing and what they identify as the primary function, but it's an important thing. Okay, great. So the first question was, why in the experiment that I presented were our samples United States, India, and world? And that is actually just the nature of how MTurk worked. Maybe it still works, but at least when we ran the study. MTurkers, I think, could only be from the United States and India. But then when we actually looked at, I forget how we had identified people from other world regions, but it's really just opportunistic. It's there on MTurk, there are a ton of people in the United States, there are a ton of people in India, and then there are just a small trickle of people who get onto MTurk from other places in the world. So it was really just convenient sample. But we tried to address that in that prolific study where we, got national sampling in all of these countries. Your second question was for Anansi, for the story level variables, there seems to be quite a bit of subjectivity for some of the variables, like to what extent is there a happy ending? How funny is this supposed to be? Totally agree. I mean, we think about that in two ways. One is that we are trying to get as many ratings per story as possible. So we're not treating like any individual as declarative, or we don't think of these as objective. We're hoping to get like some distribution across individuals, also get demographic variables about our coders, about the RAs, so that we can maybe make some understanding, some prediction. The larger goal, I mean, this comes back to the challenge of context, where the larger goal is potentially to get people from each of these cultural contexts to read these stories and provide their impressions. Nevertheless, like, at least my impression is that some of them maybe funny is tricky, but like whether it's a happy ending, I think is sometimes a bit less open to subjectivity. But yeah, I mean, that's a limitation that we have just in relying on human coders for like, cultural phenomena.
First, did Tim not see any food preparation cooking among the Aceh? And then also he says, I'm shocked that food experience and food preparation word featured as a topic in stories. How is this possible when one considers how much food is featured in festivals? So two questions there.
Yeah, so for the first one, so is the idea that because they cannot make fire, so they can't make fire, but they keep fire. They're, so in the paper, we have a picture of a man holding fire. So they apparently have lost the knowledge to make fire, but they nevertheless always keep it. And if someone's fire goes out, you go and get it from another one. So they do prepare food, and Kim has observed it. For the second one, yeah, I mean, food does feature in the stories. These are more just about topics that are differentially enriched in Anansi versus our modern short Anglophone stories. So this doesn't mean that other topics are not present. It just means that those topics are not substantially enriched in one corpus versus the other. Yeah, so the Northern Nacha do have music. They're very, very limited. I can play it if you're interested. So yeah, they have two styles, or men and women each sing. Women sing in one style, and it's the lyrics are often about, are always about dead relatives. Men sing in several styles. I think they sing, one is about hunting, but I think it might be better just to hear output HD. So this is, I believe, women singing. And then this is, oops, this is an example. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so that's what their singing sounds like. What was your second question? I don't think they interact because Kim, to get information about the Southern Nache, we had to find a missionary who works with the Southern Nache, who Kim has known for many years, but a man who was born in Paraguay and has spent most of his life there. So Kim did not have the ethnographic observations about the Southern Nache. We had to get them from elsewhere. Oh, yeah, okay, so the question was, were the LLMs, were they given contextual information about how humans have behaved to kind of train them to behave in that way, or was there less? And so there was, so again, this was Jordan's work, but my understanding is that he did not try anything like that. There was a bunch of prompt engineering where we're playing around with different prompts, but there was also an attempt to only use the prompts that humans are given, not to, I mean, it's a tricky thing where you don't want to get to this point where you're kind of like over, something that we've struggled with, which I'm curious how other people have done, but you don't want to like you don't want to just like train your model to behave to produce your data. And so what we had converged on was trying to prompt it, so like, there was experiment, it was like, I forget the exact wording, but like, please don't be afraid to use the entire scale or something. But there wasn't, to my understanding, like training LLMs using how humans had behaved, which maybe we could have done or should have done. So the question was, keeping in mind how even the American coders, you have a limitation with the fact that they lack context. When we were using these LLMs, to what extent are we thinking about this as actually learning something objective or like some approximation of objectivity about the cultural product versus learning about like how the nature of the model. Yeah, I mean, so I think we were using like objectivity or like I think we were using like human coders. At least like, are you approximating how Americans, I mean, so there's good work showing that like LLMs think very much like, this term weird, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic people. And so like, insofar as the model thinks weird, I think we were even having trouble getting it to feeling confident that it was behaving weird. So I don't even think we got to the point where we actually had to get to that decision fork. It was more like, why is it so afraid of using zeros and like, but maybe that's actually, yeah, I think we have been at the point where we feel like the behavior that we are finding is still reflective of like quirks of the model than about something about the story. But of course, we're using how humans have read the story as that benchmark. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something we've struggled with. Like, how do you benchmark the performance of this model if all we have are human coders to like mostly US undergrads to go by? And I think our thought has been like, well, like for now, I'd use the US undergrads. Yeah, like how can we, of course, we can't often get the full context of the story, but like to what extent can we try to like remove our own worldview, which is like, I'm not saying it's possible, but like, can we try to be reflective of that and really try to go by the text? So for example, yesterday, someone who had just joined as a coder was like, well, I'm rating how strong this person is, and they seem pretty strong. They walk like up a mountain, and it's like, well, I think in maybe many societies, walking far and for a long time wouldn't be as like as indicator of strength as it is in our context. But yeah, that is something we struggle with, and so I think the rule is often try to go by what is in the text and really try to have your own interpretation minimized. But So the question is, how do we define the major terms we're interested in, like song, like story, even as a precursor to these projects? Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because like, so when we were doing the music, sometimes we would go to get a healing song and it would be a chant, which lacked melodic variation, which was rhythmically invariant. And there was some question of like, is this music? Is this not music? I think often we just went by whether the ethnographer called it music, which is just like passing the buck, admittedly. So yeah. I think the larger question though, or the implication then is like, is there some other patterns among those phenomena we call musical? And I think the intuition that's often had among the people I've been working with is that it's something that varies rhythmically, melodically, or both. But there's really interesting work actually shows that people have intuitions for things that can be the same if they vary in timbre. For story, yeah, so again, it's like, we're going to collections or people who have collected stories. I will say that I think it's often like included if it's been called a story, unless, and like, of course, this then has its judgment, unless it's just a description of some local belief, like the Tarahumara believe that spirits live under tables. So I guess there's some implication of there being some like narrative logic, some causal narrative logic. But you're right. I mean, I don't think we've actually been very explicit about what that is, other than what that is. Is that your question? So I guess the answer is, okay, so the question is, did the Northern Aceh have a desire to learn dancing, learn lullabies, and would they pick up fire if they knew about fire? So the honest answer is, I don't know, but here's what I do know. I don't think they know about lullabies or that they lost lullabies. I think they know that they lost fire and I mean, it raises the question of why Kim wouldn't teach them fire, but I know that they at least lost the ability to make fire and know that they used to have fire. I believe Kim has told me, I mean, Kim is the better person to ask these questions, but that they know they had dancing, that they used to dance with local Guarani groups. I don't know what their desire about dancing is. However, there are other behaviors that they've lost, polygyny, hunting magic, that they do in secret when they are in hunting camps. They don't do them on reservations. But he has not found in spending weeks and months in hunting camps that they ever dance or sing with that. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And I want to ask us all to thank Manvir again for a really engaging talk and a wonderful way to kick off cultural analytics.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan.